The purpose of this demonstration is to summarize the workshop that I presented in class the past week. The first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to reiterate some best practices for photographing your drawing that will eventually bring into Photopea. So I'm going to use my phone. I have my drawing set up. And what you want to try to do is ensure that you don't have any strange cast shadows on your drawing and that you have fairly even light. In addition, what you also want to do is try to have the drawing fill up the majority of the frame. If I do this, well, we're not maximizing the amount of data we have to work with. So I'm going to try to fill in the majority of my frame with my drawing, take a photograph of it, and I'm going to email that photograph to myself. After you have emailed your drawing to yourself, whether you're sending it directly from your phone to your email address or any way that you can get that image on your computer, type in photopea.com on your browser. Likely most of you will be using Google Chrome. This program is free. You can use it at any point. And what we're going to do is we're going to go open from computer. I'm going to click on open from computer. I already have those images downloaded. I'm going to click, and this is going to be the one that I'll use. Now, for those using a Chromebook, likely what you'll have to do is in your dialog box that pops up, likely you're going to have to find where it says recent in the upper left hand corner. Click on recent, and the image that you had just downloaded will probably be the first one that will appear. So click open. This might take a moment or two. So now we have our image in this program. What we want to do, though, is we want to increase the contrast. So that way, we're pretty much dealing with black and white and not a whole lot of gray. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus our attention on the Layers panel. So in the Layers panel, we have our background. And if you want to, we could double click on this. And I'm going to just rename this as drawing. So in order to increase the contrast, what we're going to do is at the bottom of my Layers panel, I'm going to find this icon. It is a circle that is divided in half, and if we hover over it, it's going to say New Adjustment Layer. With the New Adjustment Layer, if I click on this, we'll have a number of different options. Now, the benefit of using adjustment layers is we can always go back in and edit them. It's not a permanent alteration to your layer or your file. So it gives us the utmost flexibility as we move forward. What we're going to first do is we're going to convert our image into black and white. The benefit of this is, with taking a photograph with our phone, likely we're going to have some inconsistencies with the lighting, and we might have some temperature variation. So we're just going to turn it into black and white. When we click on this, we're going to have a new layer that appears. And as soon as we have this layer visible, we're going to have a number of different options or parameters that are available to us. Likely this will automatically appear in the Properties panel. What we're going to do is we're going to admittedly ignore a lot of these sliders at the moment, and we're going to go back down to our adjustment layers, and we're going to now click and find where it says curves. If I click on curves, what this will allow me to do, so with this graph, what it's showing is the current distribution of value within my Photoshop document, or in this case, Photopea document. what it's showing is there is a peak of information in this value range. On the far right side is pure white. On this side, it's pure black. And this is showing us kind of where the majority of that information is at. So if I want to make kind of this off gray brighter, I'm going to click on this straight line, add a node, and with this, I can push and pull this graph so that way that gray is now brighter. It's almost pure white. Now, the downside of doing this is it may have bleached out some of my drawing. So I want to also push the darkest values a little bit darker. So I'm going to click on this line again, add another anchor point or node, and click and drag this down a little bit further. So by doing this, we went from an image, I'm going to collapse the properties panel. We went from something that looked like this to something that has a little bit more punch to it. Now with the layers panel, we have the preview icon. This icon is a small eyeball that if you want to see a layer visible, we want that icon to be clicked. If you want to bypass it and no longer see that layer, just click on it. And so the benefit of the adjustment layers is anything that exists below it. So with the curves, anything that exists below it will be affected by that adjustment layer. And we can always turn it on and off. That's kind of the first main step, is trying to get our drawing into the program and increasing the value of it, the value contrast specifically. What I'm going to do though is at this point, I'm going to group these layers together. In order to group them, I'm going to hold Shift on my keyboard, and with the curves 1 selected, if I hold Shift and click down on drawing, everything in between will be selected, and that is represented in a light gray. After I have those selected, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put it in a subfolder. If I come down to the bottom of my layers panel, we just explored using adjustment layers. Directly next to the adjustment layers is new folder. We can also, if we click on this, that will give us a new folder. I'm going to quickly undo that. We can also do Command G, and that will also give us a folder. So I'm just going to rename this as drawing. Now with this layer, there's a few ways we can go about it. Now after we have grouped all of those layers together, I'm going to duplicate that folder. In order to do this, I'm going to right click and go to duplicate layer. Now after I've duplicated it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge those layers together. This will be important for the next step that we do. So in order for us to collapse and merge all of the contents of the drawing copy to folder, we can go up to layer at the top. And if we go down to the bottom of our layers menu, we can go to merge layers. And so with the group selected in the layers panel, and we go to merge layers or Command E, if I click on this, all of the contents of that group have been fused together. So I'm just going to rename this as edited drawing. Now, the next part is kind of important. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the visibility of our drawing folder. So that way, when I do the next step, it's no longer visible and will not impact the following steps that we will do. So after we have edited drawing, what we want to do is we want to extract our character from that background. So what we will do is on the left-hand side in our tool palette, we're going to find the magic wand tool, or W. Let's click on the magic wand tool. And what this will allow us to do with the magic wand tool is it's going to find colors within that layer that are similar in value, similar in color, etc., etc. We have what's known as a tolerance. We can kind of adjust that to kind of either select more colors or less colors that are like each other. Right now, I just have it set to 4, and we'll just try that for the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, and you can see that it has this kind of dotted line that's kind of selecting certain areas. Let me maybe zoom in a little bit better. So with the magic wand tool, what it's doing is it's selecting those like colors together. And after you have an area selected, what it's going to allow you to do is edit those selected pixels, and you can do anything with it. So what we want to do is we want to expand that selection to include more. Let's just try real quick. Let's change maybe the tolerance of this to maybe 20. It was at 4. Let's maybe put it around 20. Let's see if that helps. And so that actually did kind of expand it a little bit more. Let's see. Did it do a little too much? I'm going to maybe bring that down a little bit. Let's just try 10. See if that's a happy meet. Okay, so that one seems a little bit better. And if that's getting you close, what you can also do is, let's say you still want to add to it. What you can do is with the magic wand tool, hold Shift on your keyboard and click more. That's going to allow you to add to that selection. Let's see where we're at. All right, so now I know it's not perfect, but I want to just kind of test to see where we're at. What we're going to do is I could hit the delete key on my keyboard, and let's just see what that does. So, did pretty good. However, we can kind of see that, well, I no longer have any kind of white in the brim of my character's hat. There might be even some other pockets that didn't quite work out. The problem with deleting is that information goes away permanently. We can't bring it back. So what we want to do is give ourselves a little bit more flexibility in our process. So what we're going to do is, all right, that delete or clear, we're going to take it a step back. We have our history options at the top. The history panel will allow us to click on a previous state. We can see pretty much almost everything we've done up until this point. So if we make a mistake, just click on the previous state. So I'm going to go back to the magic wand. And what we'll do is we're going to use what's known as a layer mask. Now, in this program, it's called Add Raster Mask. It's the same thing. They're just using slightly different naming conventions. And it's represented by this icon, which is the rectangle with the dot in the center. This is at the bottom of our layers panel. Now, what I want to do is, before we click on Add Raster Mask, I want to do one thing to my selection. So I'm going to come back over to my document, and I'm going to right-click again. What I want to do is right-click, and I'm going to find the option that says Inverse. What this will do is it will flip the areas selected. And this will be important when we add the layer mask. If I click on this, we'll kind of see maybe the dashed lines within our document slightly shift, but it won't be that noticeable. So, slight change. But now when we come down to add raster mask, if we click on this, after we click on add raster mask, we're going to see a new icon appear on our edited drawing layer. Specifically, this icon will be directly next to this thumbnail, and there will be a link in between, and this icon will be in pure black and white. So let's click on this. And you're like, all right, we just did a number of steps that gave us the same result as deleting or clearing. Yes, visually it looks the same, but in terms of function, this is superior, because what it will allow us to do is we can now go back and bring back this area that is no longer visible. The benefit of a raster mask is we haven't deleted any information. We can either hide or make visible any part of this layer by just using either pure black or pure white. And you can kind of see in this thumbnail, everything that is pure white is visible. Anything that is in black is just hidden from view. It's not deleted. And so we can always come back to this layer and add and subtract to what is visible. So what I want to do is I'm going to come over to my brush. You can also hit B on your keyboard. Click on that. And I'm going to increase the brush size. So we can select on this little icon. After you've selected on the brush tool or hit B on your keyboard, the options tool panel will automatically give you a different set of parameters. And so by default, your brush size should be around 15. If you click on the downward pointing triangle, we will get a sub menu that will allow us to increase the brush size. So I'm just going to put it at 50 at the moment. And by default, our color for our brush should be black and white. Let's just real quick, I'm going to try to intentionally mess this up. Let's just say that we have a different color for this. If you want to go back to pure black and white, which is what we want for adjusting the layer mask or raster mask, we could either click on this icon, which will put it back to the default, or if you hit D on your keyboard, that will also go back to the default. So once again, pure white will make things visible. And when it comes to the way these programs are set up, whether it's Photopea or Photoshop, this kind of gray grid represents transparency. Well, there's nothing visible in this region. And so what I'm going to do is increase my brush size, and we can also use the bracket keys, which is represented in the lower left hand corner. And I'm going to paint back in this region. And I'm going to do this kind of quick. And I'm just using my mouse. So it might not be super precise, but I'm just kind of coming in here and double checking what is visible. Now that I see this, I'm zooming in, noticing that this boot has been somewhat made transparent. Now, I can hit X on my keyboard. Let me just do this real quick. If I hit X on my keyboard, what it'll do is it'll flip the foreground color and background color. And when I'm working on the raster mask, you want to flip back and forth between white and black. Because once again, white will reveal and black will make certain passages within a layer invisible. And I should just also clarify, you need to make sure that you're selected on the black and white thumbnail for this to work. If I select on this, the actual thumbnail for the layer, and I start trying to paint, well, I'm now actually painting directly on my drawing. And that's not what I want. So you have to be careful. If you're going to try to hide certain passages of that layer, you need to make sure that you have properly selected the raster mask or layer mask. So now I'm going to hide maybe some of this and just clean up my drawing a little bit. And I'm just using the trackpad on my mouse because I have a magic mouse to kind of zoom in and zoom out. You can also use the command plus or command minus in order to zoom in and zoom out. Let's see, I want to get rid of, there's this area right here that doesn't need to be visible. And there's all of this kind of noise from kind of the uneven drawing or uneven lighting on my image. You know, the process that I'm showing you is completely accessible. You know, this program's free. Most of you have a cell phone or something that can capture your drawings, and you could try this out. Try it with your own work, because you don't necessarily need all the fancy tools in order to make compelling digital designs. Now that we have our drawing more or less extracted from the background, and let's just take one step back. If you tried this and it didn't give you this gray checkered background right away, double check to make sure if you have your drawing folder still visible. If this is still visible, well, it won't look like anything worked, because we need that to no longer be visible, so that way we get our drawing in isolation. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to start adding color. We're going to come back down to our layers panel. We're going to come down to this icon. It's right next to the trash can. If we hover over this, it says new layer, and we're going to click new layer. We should have layer 1 appear, and I'm going to rename this and call this color. Now we're going to actually try and putting some color into our design. So in order to change the color, I'm going to click on this, and be sure to click on the foreground color, which is going to be the swatch that is in, I guess, the top left out of this icon. And let's say I want to work on my character's shirt. So what I'm going to do is I want the shirt to be maybe kind of like a brown. And so when it comes to the color picker window, we have our hues on this side, and it's in a small little strip. And so you can click and move in order to determine if you want a blue, a cyan, green, etc., etc. So I'm going to make kind of a brown shirt. And so after you've kind of determined the hue, then you can kind of click to see which type of iteration of that hue you want. So in the upper right, it's kind of really bright in value and also pure saturation. And so if we drag it all the way down, it's going to be dark. in the center is going to be still fairly dark. It's like a middle value, but it's halfway in between pure saturation and being completely desaturated. So I think that sort of khaki color would be good for this shirt. After you've selected a color that you like, simply click OK. If you click on the X, then it won't accept that selected color. So click OK. Now, with the brush, if I start painting, well, it's covering up my drawing. That's kind of not what we want. We want to make sure that, well, we could still see our drawing because we spent a lot of time trying to carefully craft our design. So what we can do, though, is instead of starting over and trying to paint in between the lines, well, we can take advantage of these layers and the capabilities of this sort of editing program. By zooming into my layers panel, I have the color layer selected, and where it says normal, this is the current blending mode. And so whenever we put anything on this layer with normal, it's going to be fully opaque unless we're painting with something that has a transparency. What we can do, though, is if we click on normal, we're going to get a number of different options. And these are all different blending modes. And we're not going to test out all of them, but what I would suggest is experimenting. Everything between darken and darker color, well, it's going to darken the layer that exists below it, or layers. Lighten, well, and lighter color, you kind of anticipate, well, it'll lighten up whatever's below it. Overlay and between hard mix, well, those are do a combination of different things. You'll just have to experiment. But what's going to work best for at least this scenario is we're going to do multiply. So let's click multiply, and now we could see the drawing coming through. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do, though, is, well, I'm painting outside my character. You know, that's kind of not great. We spent all that time trying to carefully extract our character from the background to now just have to be really, I guess, careful with painting it in. What we can do is we can have this boundary of our character act as a point of constraint or as a limitation. So right now we have the area that's opaque for our character, and then we have the area that is completely transparent. If we click on our color layer and right click on the color layer, we're going to get some options. What we're going to find is with this submenu, we're going to select clipping mask. Way the clipping mask works is the layer that's below it will be used as a constraint. And so this will do exactly what we want. Everything that's opaque will be affected. Anything that is completely transparent, and as in this case, won't even be visible. So if we click on clipping mask, we'll see that that color will no longer be visible in this area. And that's kind of interesting. So that worked, but now I'm noticing there's maybe a little bit more noise that I need to kind of clean up with my layer mask. So I'm going to do that one more time. If I right click on my color layer, go to clipping mask, it should now be constrained to this region. And since this looks a little messy, well, we're going to go back to the edited drawing layer, but what we want to select is our raster mask and go back in and kind of clean it up. So I'm going to click on that icon, which is pure black and white. Make sure that my color is set to default. So hit D. You can hit D on your keyboard. I'm going to hit X to flip it from pure white, which is the foreground color, to black. And I can now come in here and clean this up because I didn't realize that there was that much noise still. Once again, we're not deleting anything. And in this area, it's a little bit off. There's a chunk missing. So I'll just click on X to flip it from white to black or black to white. And we're going to paint that area in. And so I'm going to kind of keep doing that until I get my base layer more or less finished. And let's just do one thing real quick. Let's say, oh, well, I started drawing on this, painting this color, and I want to get that same color to continue it. What I would recommend is, well, let's go back to the color layer where it says multiply. I'm going to go back and click on normal just momentarily. What this is going to do is it will allow me to sample this exact color so that way I can use it again. In order to sample this, I'm going to come up to my tool palette and I'm going to find this icon. You can also hit I on your keyboard, and once I click on anywhere in here, you'll see that the color you have selected down here will automatically change. So if I click on that, now it has sampled that exact color. If I click over here or here or here, it will constantly update and put it as your foreground color. So I'm going to click on this, go back to my brush tool. I'm going to make sure that this is set to multiply, and I'm just going to kind of continue to paint. And so I'm going to kind of do this until I get a base color down for just about everything. And yes, this might take a little bit of time, especially with not having better input other than just having a mouse or a trackpad. But the objective on this single layer for color is we're just trying to get a base set of colors. And we'll talk about adding shadows in just a little bit. So let's say that you've gone through and you've started to color a lot of this in. Let me just maybe do one real quick. Let me get some kind of flesh color just for this stage of the demo. And I'm doing this all on this layer. Now, in theory, you could make a number of different layers over in your layers panel, and each one could be, you know, the shirt color. And then you just fill in that region with the shirt color, make another layer and call this, you know, glasses. And if you wanted to, we could change that to a color that you would want. I'm going to go to normal and click on multiply to get a different blending mode. So it's all dependent on how you want this to be set up. The nice thing about separating everything on different layers is, well, it gives you, once again, more flexibility in how you proceed forward. Does it overcomplicate it? Yeah, potentially. I would still, though, if you do multiple layers, just once again, right click on it, go to clipping mask, and it will ensure that it's self-contained within your character. Let's say that you've gone through and you've really kind of cleaned this up. You have things kind of where you want it to be. Now we're going to start talking about adding a little bit of dimension, adding some form to your character. In a very similar manner, we're going to come over to our layers panel. I'm going to make a new layer. Yes, you could come down to the bottom of our layers panel and click on the icon for new layer. We can always also go up to layer, go to new layer, and it's also showing you the keyboard shortcut. So if that's something that you're comfortable doing. So I'm going to make a new layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some shadows. So I'm going to come down and click on my color picker to bring this window up. And what I had kind of found for this specific example is kind of a bluish gray seems to work well. So I'm going to click OK to accept that color. I'm going to rename this shadows. And if I start painting, we'll put down some color. I want to make sure that the brim of the hat, the underside of it, is in shadow because it shouldn't be receiving the same amount of light. So I'll kind of fill this in. And yes, I will put a clipping mask on this so that it's also constrained. And right now this looks somewhat terrible. And it does. However, if I come back over, we'll right click on this, do clipping mask, select on that. And we will go back up to our blending modes. And let's just see what these different options have. So we've done multiply so far. Let's try what darken does. Honestly, that doesn't do a whole lot. Let's try multiply. That's kind of working for sure. So it looks like this side is obviously darker in value than the top side. It's making the flesh color right here a little bit colder. But let's see what color burn does. That's kind of interesting. Linear burn. See, I kind of like linear burn because it's making this area a little bit warmer. However, this region is almost black. And so I want it to be maybe a little bit lighter in value. What we could do though is instead of trying to change that gray that we painted down, that bluish gray, let's go over to opacity, which is directly next to our different blending mode. And let's click on that downward pointing triangle. And let's just reduce it. Let's see. That's not bad. Let's see what darker color does. Let's see what color burn does. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with linear burn. And so what we could do is we can come through here and now start painting in some cast shadows and form shadows for our character. Now I'm envisioning the light source coming from the upper right. And so that's kind of informing how I'm approaching designing the light shapes and the shadow shapes. So when it comes to this arm right here, I feel like if the light's coming from, let me just make this real quick. The light's coming from this direction. Then what's going to happen with this arm is it's going to create a cast shadow that's kind of shining on his shirt and on his belly. So let's just do that real quick. And I know this is once again somewhat crude because I'm just doing this somewhat quick. But this is already going to help with creating a more believable sense of dimension with our character. If I come over to the character's nose, underside should have a little bit of a shadow. It will put a cast shadow on the mustache, so on and so forth. And I could keep pushing this as far as I want. There's so much that I could do right here. And right now, that's already looking a lot better. If you don't like it, well, you could turn it on and off. The other thing is we could, if you make a mistake, let's say, all right, maybe this is a little too blotchy for the shadow right here. If we hit E on our keyboard, we will get our eraser. What I noticed on the Chromebooks is the eraser is not directly showing on our tool palette. You might have to click and hold on the brush tool in order to find the eraser. Normally, I just use the keyboard shortcut, so I'll hit E on my keyboard. The eraser will allow me on this layer to come in here and kind of carve in maybe some more unique shapes for these shadows. So what I'm actually going to do is let's make another layer. Let's call this highlights. And yes, once again, we will right click on the highlights layer, put clipping mask, and it will now be constrained. Typically what I like to do is I will go back to our eyedropper tool, select on the shirt color, sample that, go back to my brush, hit B on my keyboard. I'll click on that color to bring up the color picker window, and I will simply drag it a little bit lighter. And depending on if I want that light source to be colder or warmer, I might kind of shift our hue a little bit. Let's say the light source is a little warmer. So this is our starting point. If I want to make it warmer, I'm going to actually bring it over towards the right. It's going to make it a little bit more saturated, and I'm going to bring it up in value. So this color, by comparison, looks warmer than this. And so that's going to be my approach for the highlights on this specific example. I'll come over here and I'm going to make my brush size a little bit larger. And let's see, we paint it. And what you could do is, well, once again, this is painting over my drawing. What I might want to do is, let's see what the different blending modes are going to do. Lighten, let's see what that does. Honestly, nothing. We'll click screen. See how this is treating the line work underneath. It's a little odd because what it's doing is it's brightening up that line work. I just want it to adjust that color, not affecting the lines. Color dodge, it's kind of shifting the hue of the line work. So it's making some of the lines have almost a reddish characteristic. Linear dodge, a little too much. Lighter color, yeah. None of these are really giving me exactly what I want. So I'm going to show you a slightly different approach. Instead of trying to do a different blending mode, let's actually take our drawing, the edited drawing, down here. Let's right click and duplicate the layer. What I'm going to do is, instead of dragging this one, I'm going to take this edited drawing and I'm going to move it just above the highlights. Yes, that's now covering up all of my drawing, all of my color, and we're back to almost square one. However, what I can now do is on this edited drawing, let's say this is top, and let's say this is edited drawing base. What I can do with this layer is, if I want to still see the line work, is let's go from normal and now let's try multiply. And so that's allowing me to see that highlight or that lighter color, and it's not really altering how dark that drawing or that line work is appearing. And so I could come through here and start painting all of this and getting a little bit further along. And let's say you want to take this a step further and you want to do a little bit of blending. What I would suggest is we're going to create a new layer, call this blending, and we'll still have it constrained to our character. So we can come up, right click, go to clipping mask, and what I'll do is I'll sample that color, and instead of painting it fully opaque, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reduce the opacity of my paintbrush. So I can come up to the top options tool panel. We adjusted the size of the brush. Now we could also tweak the opacity. So if I reduce this down to 50%, well, what it's doing is it's giving me kind of this transitional color. And so this is a way for me to kind of go in between different hues. And I could always turn on and off that edited drawing top so that way it's maybe not interfering with my colors. And after I've painted in 50%, we see that we get this kind of nice color. Then I can resample it. I'll hit on my keyboard, or we can pick the color picker tool or the eyedropper, select it, go back to the paintbrush, and then I'll change my opacity from 50 to 100%. So I'll do that, and then I can paint. And this is a quick way to get some nice variation and variety in your piece. And maybe I'll do this real quick, kind of in isolation on layer 1. Let's delete that. I want to make a new layer just as an example. Let's call this example. And let's say I just make this real quick. I'm going to fill this in with that color. And I'm going to get my brush. And let's just put this kind of purple. Let's make it actually a dark purple. And so what I could do is, if I wanted to kind of blend between these, and let's maybe duplicate this real quick. I'm going to actually move that one out of the way. What we can do is, on this example, just kind of showing exactly what I just did, but in an isolated format. So what I could do is, with my brush tool, I can go to I on my keyboard, select on this purple, go back to the brush. If I have the brush tool selected, I'm going to hit 5 on my keyboard. That will automatically reduce opacity to 50. And I'm just going to click once. That's overlapping this purple with this kind of gold khaki. Then I can resample that by hitting I on my keyboard. It has now sampled that right there. Go back to my brush, hit 0 on my keyboard. We were at 50%, or if you hit 5 on your keyboard, if I hit 0, that'll automatically go to 100. I'll paint that, and we have this nice middle value, or middle color. And I can keep breaking this down, doing that same process repeatedly to get all of these kind of in-between colors. And so that's kind of perfectly in harmony. It's this really nice gradation. Now, the other option that we have is, well, maybe this is all kind of a strange approach in some ways, like, because those still feel segmented. I'm going to go back over here real quickly, paint it completely the solid color. And for the most part, what we've been doing is, with our brush tool, we've been doing everything with 100% for the hardness. If I reduce that all the way down to 0, make my brush size a lot larger, and I'm going to flip it, my color, from the gold khaki to the purple. If I hit X on my keyboard, and what I can do is, just with a really big brush, we can get this kind of nice subtle gradation. And I'm trying to, maybe I made the brush a little bit too large. And that looks actually pretty nice and even. So whatever works best for your approach. Personally, I like starting off with this more segmented manner, because it's given me a structure, specifically going from a light side to a shadow side. Whereas sometimes if you're using a really soft brush, I think it's really easy for it to kind of get muddy, lacking definition in the form. I'm going to delete those examples, and then now we're going to move on to kind of the final stages of our illustration. And I'm going to actually come over to this other document that's already kind of preloaded. It's pretty much this example, but just taken a step further, so that way it's a little bit more rendered out using exactly the process that we've just talked about. So there's my shadows, here's my highlights. Then after I had those established, I did an additional paint layer on top of it, and then I have that clean drawing kind of on top. What I'm going to do is I want to once again put all of these different layers in a single folder. So if I click on my clean drawing at the top, I'm going to come all the way down to the clean drawing at the bottom, hold shift and click. It'll select everything in between. After you have all those selected, I'm going to go to Command G to put it in a group. And let's call this finished character. What I want to do is at this stage, I want to bring in a background image. And you can do whatever background image you want. For my character, I want them to be in Monument Valley. So I'm going to go up to a new tab, and using Google, typed in Monument Valley, and I'm going to go to images. Now, one trick that I want to show is after you have your search results in images on Google, we want to limit the images that are being shown to us. Specifically, we want high-res images. So we're going to select on Tools, and I'm going to go over to Size, and I'm going to find Large. Because what this is going to do is it's going to give us more information, more data to work with. We're working in a raster-based application. And so if you're working in a more professional context, the more data that you have at your disposal, well, it gives you more flexibility. So let's just click on this image right here. So for any one of these images, when you click on it and you get a preview and you hover over that preview, it should indicate the dimensions in pixels. So this is 1280 by 700. That's not bad. That's pretty good. This one, well, 1280 by 800. The one I've been using for this demonstration is actually, when I hover over it, 3000 by 1642. Now, in order for me to get this file into Photopea as my background, I'm going to right click on this. And what I like to do is if I click open link in new tab, it's just going to take me to the website. So what I want to do is go to open image in new tab. If I click save image as, often what it will do is it's going to not save the high res image that's being represented. It's just going to show you the thumbnail in the preview. Go open image in new tab, go to your new tab, and this image has a lot of data. This is great. It's even allowing me to zoom in here. After you found the image, right click, save image as. I'm going to just put this in my downloads, and I'm going to go back to Photopea. What I want to do is, in order to get this image into this application, we'll go up to File, but I want to double check one thing. You need to make sure that you have your top layer, whether it's a folder or the clean drawing, have something in your layers panel selected, and I would suggest having the top element selected. By doing so, this will tell Photopea where to place this image that you've just sourced. If you don't have something selected, what we've encountered is it won't work. It'll kind of show that there's a bounding box, but there won't be any image there. It's just a glitch, it seems like, in the program. So we're going to come up to File, and we're going to select Open in Place. I'm going to go to my downloads. Once again, you will likely have to go to Recent if you're using a Chromebook and find your file. So I have that image selected, and I'm going to go to Open. Now, I can see this image. Likely, it has put it in the top of my finished character. That's fine. I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to go back up to File, Open in Place, click on that image, click Open. And before you do anything else, what you will see is your image has this bounding box around it. So we have these little white boxes that are going all the way around your graphic. That's indicating that you can scale up or down your image. So I'm going to just scale this thing up so that way it fills the top and bottom of my image or of my digital canvas. After you've sized it up and you have it where you want it, you can hit either enter or return on your keyboard. We also have in the options toolbar, we have a check mark. And that's just to kind of confirm the placement and transformation of your placed background image. So I'm just going to click confirm. And what we want to do is we want to see our character still, right? So we're going to take this layer, and I'm just going to rename this background. And we're going to take it out of our folder, if you made a folder, and just drag it and put it below our drawing. So now I have my character kind of in context of an environment. So we're going to do a few more things before we save. Collapse our finished character folder. That way we don't see all those layers. Sometimes just organization is good. Out of sight, out of mind. It looks a little less daunting. I'm going to click back on the background. And let's just say that, well, you know, we want to maybe move it around, do a few other things to this specific background. So what we could do is if you want to move it, we're going to come back up to the move tool, or if you hit V on your keyboard, if I click on this, what you should have is in our options toolbar or options panel, you may have transform controls already pre-selected. If you do not, click on it, because without it, well, just nothing really happens after you select the move tool. If I click on transform controls, after I click on transform controls, we will now see that bounding box reappear. I also suggest turning off auto select. It can be kind of problematic when you're first using this program, because what will happen is if you have auto select on and you want to move your character, see what it just did? It accidentally clicked and is taking the drawing away from the rest of my character because, well, I clicked and just selected that. So it can be somewhat annoying unless you're really intentional with where you click. So I'm going to turn auto select off, collapse that, go back to the background layer, move that. And what I want to do is right now the background doesn't feel like it's complementing my character. For one, if I zoom in, the light source for my character is coming from the upper right. The light for the background, well, that's actually coming from kind of the upper left. So they're not really compatible at the moment. So I'm going to select my background layer and I'm going to go up to edit and transform. What we can do is there's so many different options and parameters right here. We're not going to get to all of it. But what I want to do is I'm going to go to flip horizontally. That will mirror that background image. So now the light source at least seems a little bit more compatible. Clicked flip horizontally. That looks a little bit better. But, you know, the background has a lot of color to it. It looks somewhat intense. And so because of that, it's almost competing for the viewer's attention more so than the character itself. What I want to do is I want to adjust the color for just that background. What we've already kind of explored previously with this demonstration is we can come down to a new adjustment layer. And what I want to do is we've done black and white, we've done curves, but let's actually try hue and saturation. If I click on this, well, we get in our properties panel a few different sliders. So hue, well, if I move this, it's going to shift the hue for that image. Actually, it'll shift that hue for any element that exists below that adjustment layer. Mainly what I want to do is less so much of hue, but I mainly want to make that background a little bit lighter. Because now by doing this, it's helping the contour of my character stand out. Also, if I reduce the saturation, that will help. And I think I am going to maybe make it just a little bit warmer. So we go from this This is where it was at, and then to this. And I know that maybe that original image is inherently, I guess, more beautiful, but we have to be intentional with how it's using or how it's being utilized within the context of our illustration. And at the moment, it's competing for the viewer's attention. I'm going to move the background a little bit because I want my character to be standing on this pedestal or kind of this platform right here. And let's just say, all right, but I really liked this section over here and it's being completely cut out of view. Well, what we could do is we could always extend our canvas. And so for us to do that, we're going to come up to our tool palette and we're going to find this icon. Now, once again, if you're on a Chromebook, the organization of your tool palette might be slightly different. So if you don't see it, just hit C on your keyboard. And what we'll do is after you hit C on your keyboard, we have a bounding box right now around our background. If we hit C, we'll see a bounding box around kind of our digital canvas. So what I can do is if I want to extend this background, click and drag. And one kind of notable difference between Photopea and then Photoshop is Photoshop, when you extend it, it will actually give you a preview of, the background over here. Unfortunately, Photopea does not do that. You'll just have to kind of trust your intuition. Let's say we want to extend it out here. Then we just have to confirm it. Once again, to confirm a transformation or a crop, we have a check mark in our options panel, or you can just hit return or enter on your keyboard, and there we are. Now, what we could do is, let's say that our characters may be a little large within the context of the scene and you want to scale them down. So if you've put your character into a folder, what you could do is select that folder and then go to Edit and go to Transform and go to Scale. That will allow you to scale down your character. Now, if I hit Return and accept that, great. Oops. I went back to crop. Got to be careful with that sometimes. Now, the problem with this is I'm going to do a quick example. Just undid that. I'm going to duplicate this character. I'm going to merge it so I can do Command E, and I'm going to move it off to the side. And what I want to show is maybe the limitation of working in this sort of program. And this goes for Photoshop as well. This is what raster-based graphics has a limitation with. So if I scale this down, what's happening is, all right, yes, it's making it smaller, but in order for it to do that, it's throwing out data. So let's make it really small. I'll hit return. By doing that, by hitting return, I have confirmed the elimination of information. If I scale this back up to roughly about the same size as the original, maybe that's a little bit larger. You're like, okay, it doesn't look that bad. Let's see. It's not too bad. I'll hit return. But now let's zoom in. That's our original. Things look as good as is. And then zooming over to our other one. In order for it to scale it down and confirming it, it just said, we don't need that data anymore. So then if you scale it back up, the computer is having a hard time trying to make up the difference. It's trying to fill in the gaps. And by doing so, you get a fuzzy image. You get something that looks really pixelated. This is where we were at. And this is where we ended up. And so you want to be very diligent that if you're going to scale something down, maybe preserve an initial original copy. So that way, if you needed to adjust it later on, you still could go back to the original information. So that way you're not losing important details within your work. Now, the last thing I want to show is, let's just say that we want to have a shadow underneath our character. So I'm just going to make a new layer. We're going to do cast shadow, put that underneath our finished character. We will get a brush. Let's just make it kind of a dark brown. And what we can do is with our brush tool, we're going to change the shape and size of the brush. So let's make the brush quite a bit larger, reduce the hardness. And then we also have this set of options right here. I can actually turn the direction of the brush, and also with kind of those two anchor points or nodes, I can go from a circle to kind of a more oval shape. If I want to make this brush real large, let me zoom back out. Usually what I'll do, I typically will, if I'm going to do something like this, I might put my opacity to 25%. I just quickly typed in 2.5. That will only work if you're already on the brush tool. And I will kind of lightly build up the shadow, making my brush shape a little bit smaller each time. Let's say, all right, well, that looks a little too red for this. Let's just try a different blending mode. And you know what? That's not too bad. I might even just leave it at that. I can move it around. I just hit V on my keyboard. And maybe it's still a little too red. If that's the case, well, yes, we could come down here, make a new adjustment layer. Let's just do that real quick. Hue saturation. We can shift that color. Now, yes, we have the same issue happening. Everything below it is being affected. If I want the hue saturation to just impact the cast shadow, well, we can use the cast shadow as a limiter. Right click on the hue saturation. We're going to go to clipping mask. And so now let's just, so we can kind of see this, it's just now affecting that layer by having the clipping mask just affect that. So let's reduce that like this. I had it a little too red. Let's bring the saturation down. I still feel like the saturation is a little too red, and that's not too bad. I might even reduce the opacity of this whole layer. And I think there we have it. So the last step of this whole process is, well, going to File, Save as PSD. You always want to make sure you save your PSD if you want to go back to this later on. I'll just put Aaron Pickens. The PSD is a Photoshop document. So that way, if you ever have the professional program from Adobe, you can actually always open up these files and they'll work seamlessly. Click Save. Once again, go to File, Save as PSD. That will contain all of your information, such as your adjustment layers, clipping mask, layers, etc., etc. Give you the opportunity to fine-tune and manipulate this illustration. If you want to share this online, what you want to do though is go to File and then find Export As. And we have a number of different options available. PNG will maintain transparency if that's something that you need. JPEG for, I would say, 70%, 75% of applications is sufficient. We'll click on JPEG. And when you have this dialog box, what it'll do is it's giving you a temporary preview. It's not a cropped image. It's just zoomed in to kind of show the quality of your graphic as a JPEG. What I was having everyone do is just name their file, first and last name. And for the quality, 100% is great, but the higher the percentage, the larger the file size. If I reduce this all the way to 0, let's see. Ooh. See, it's giving you a preview. That's only 152 kilobytes, and we get a lot of wonkiness when it comes to our processing of the image. And so we're losing a lot of clarity. In some ways, zoomed up, I actually kind of like it. But if you want it to be more of a one-to-one, let's see, leave the quality at 100. I think anywhere for 70 to 100 should be good. I'm going to zoom back in. Now, one thing that I was noticing when students were saving everything on their computer, they might have also had another option down here. It said convert to sRGB. Leave that checked. What that means is sRGB is kind of a standard color profile for what you would see on the web. And so what it means is the color is going to more accurately be represented when it's seen online. So that's something that you want to probably keep checked. And then just click save and save it somewhere on your computer. And that's pretty much it. I just realized something with my cast shadow. It was on vivid light. No wonder it seemed more saturated than it should have been. All right, that's weird. I think I might have hit a different key that automatically changed it. So this program is free. It's, I think, wonderful to use. The one problem is it can be a little buggy, a little glitchy, but the benefit of it is these skill sets, this sort of operating procedure of, using layers, history, this all mirrors exactly what you would see in Photoshop. So if this is something you're interested in, get accustomed to how this program works before you invest in that other program, or if you want to go to school for digital arts. You'll have, I think, a better understanding of editing raster graphics, and it'll be easier for you to pick up that specific application of Photoshop. Yes, it's a cheap imitation, but it actually does a pretty good job. So that's pretty much it for this particular demonstration.